The cowboy paid an Apache woman to clean for him. Just another deal on a cold frontier morning. But when she stepped into his cabin, silence fell heavier than snow on the roof. Her hands were scarred, her eyes calm, and the way she looked at his rifle said she'd seen more than dust and dirt. He thought he was buying help for the winter. He had no idea she carried something that could break or save him. Why did she really come to his cabin? And what secret turned a simple bargain into redemption neither of them expected? The wind crawled through the pines that morning, dragging thin threads of snow across the open yard. The cowboy stood on the porch of his half-built cabin, coffee steaming in one hand, a worn coin purse in the other. He wasn't used to hiring help, especially not from the Apache camp down the valley, but winter had already bitten through his supplies, and the cabin reeked of smoke and neglect. He told himself it was just work, a day's pay for a day's cleaning. Nothing more. When she arrived, she didn't speak. She carried no bundle, no greeting, only a single folded blanket, and a look that made him feel as if she already knew the measure of the place, and of him. Her moccasins left quiet prints in the frost as she stepped onto the porch. The horses behind the barn stirred, sensing something he couldn't name. He nodded toward the doorway. "Cabins through here," he muttered. She passed him without a word, brushing the air with the faint scent of sage and smoke. Inside, the dim light caught the edge of her hair, black and heavy like a river under moonlight. She scanned the room once, the cold hearth, the empty shelves, the unmade cot, and set to work with calm precision. He watched from the doorway, uneasy. Her movements were deliberate, ritualistic almost, dusting the table as though removing memory itself, stacking wood like offering it to something unseen. He tried to speak again, to explain payment or rules, but the words jammed in his throat. The scrape of her hand against the rough table filled the silence instead. Outside, the sky thickened to grey. A storm was rolling over the ridge. He felt it in his bones, the same way he felt that this woman wasn't here merely to clean. Something about the way she moved, the way she avoided the firelight, told him she was hiding from more than the cold. When she finally looked up, her eyes met his for the first time. "You don't ask many questions," she said softly. He swallowed. Not yet. And with that, the first flake of snow struck the window like a warning. By the time the storm reached the valley, the cabin's windows were fogged with breath and firelight. The cowboy sat by the door, mending a leather strap, listening to the rhythmic scrape of her broom across the floorboards. Every sound she made was measured, no wasted motion, no small talk, just the whisper of bristles, the creak of old timber, the soft hiss of wind finding its way through the cracks. He told himself he didn't care who she was just here to work. But each time he looked up, his eyes betrayed him. There was something steady in the way she carried herself, as if even this drafty room obeyed her quiet order. When she lifted the kettle to pour water into the basin, the sleeves of her dress slipped to her elbows, revealing thin scars that crossed her forearms in uneven lines. Not fresh, but not forgotten either. "You can leave the pot," he said finally, his voice too loud in the small space. She didn't look at him. "It's not done yet." "It's clean enough. For you," she answered simply. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. She was right. He lived like a man waiting for the world to end. Dirt in the corners, soot on the hearth, dust thick enough to write regret in. She took a cloth from her belt and began wiping the shelves, humming low under her breath, a tune he didn't know. It wasn't a song for others to hear. It was for herself, or maybe for the ghosts she carried. "You from the camp near Dry Creek?" he asked after a moment. She paused, cloth still in hand. "I was." "Not anymore?" Her gaze lingered on the window. "Some things can't stay in one place." He wanted to ask more, but her tone closed the door. He went back to his leatherwork, pretending not to notice the way the room felt smaller when she was quiet. Minutes stretched. The fire cracked. A log fell, sending sparks toward the ceiling. She didn't flinch. Instead, she crouched, feeding smaller sticks into the flame with careful hands. For the first time, he realized she was warming the room, not for herself, but for him. That was the act of care before the threat, though he didn't know it yet. Outside, the wind howled harder, rattling the shutters. The horses stamped nervously in their pen. The smell of snow grew thick, sharp, electric. Then came a faint rhythm beneath it all, hoofbeats, slow at first, then faster. She straightened, eyes narrowing. Someone's coming. He grabbed his coat, instinct prickling. No one visited during a storm, not out here. He stepped to the door and peered into the white. A figure on horseback was cutting through the drifts, a man hunched low, face hidden beneath a wide hat. The cowboy's jaw tightened. "Stay inside," he said, but she moved beside him, unafraid. "You know him?" "Don't think so." The rider dismounted, boots crunching over the ice, and knocked. 3 slow thuds that carried through the cabin like a hammer on a coffin lid. The cowboy opened the door halfway, wind clawing at his coat. A tall man stood there, wrapped in a long oilskin coat, breath steaming. "Evening," the stranger said. His smile was wrong, too casual for the weather. "Heard you were looking for help." "Not anymore," the cowboy replied. "Got all I need." The man's gaze slid past him toward the firelight and the woman standing within it. His grin widened. "Seems you do." Something in his tone made her step back, clutching the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The cowboy blocked the doorway. "You got business, and say it." The stranger tilted his head, snow dripping from the brim of his hat. "She used to work for a friend of mine. Ran off with a few things that weren't hers." "That true?" the cowboy asked quietly, not turning around. The woman's voice was steady but low. "He's lying." The stranger laughed. "That's so. Ask her what she's hiding under that blanket." Then, for a heartbeat, everything went still. The wind, the fire, even the man at the door. The cowboy's pulse hammered. He didn't look back at her. Not yet. "You best ride back," he said evenly. "Storm's getting worse." The man's smile vanished. "You don't want her trouble. Trust me." "I'll take my chances." They stared at each other, snow swirling between them like ash. Finally, the stranger spat into the snow, swung into his saddle, and rode off into the white blur. When the door closed and the cabin seemed to exhale, the cowboy turned, but the woman was already near the corner, unwrapping the blanket from her shoulders. He froze. Beneath the fabric, bound tight to her chest, was a small bundle, too still, too quiet to be anything but a sleeping child. She met his eyes. "Now you know what I'm hiding." Outside, the hoofbeats faded, swallowed by the storm. Inside, the fire hissed as if warning that peace would not last long. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The child slept soundly, wrapped in faded cloth that looked handwoven. Apache patterns, crimson and rust. The cowboy stared at the small bundle, feeling the air between them turn heavy as stone. The storm rattled the windows again, wind wailing like something alive. She tucked the baby closer to the fire, her movements precise, protective. "He won't wake," she murmured. "You didn't tell me," he said quietly. "You didn't ask." He rubbed a hand over his jaw, uncertain whether to be angry or impressed. "That man outside, he after you or the child?" "Both," she said simply. Her calm unnerved him more than fear would have. He crouched near the fire, watching as she fed another piece of wood into the flame. The light carved sharp lines across her face, strong, proud, but exhausted. Whatever she'd run from, it hadn't been easy. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set one near her hand. "You can rest here tonight," he said. "Storm's bad. Nobody'll find you." Her eyes flicked to his. "Nobody ever stays hidden for long." He didn't argue. He knew the truth of that better than most. They drank in silence. Outside, the storm roared louder, shaking the roof. When the fire popped, the baby stirred, a tiny whimper escaping. She bent low, whispering something soft in her native tongue, a lullaby that carried the rhythm of wind through canyons. "What's his name?" he asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Names bring luck or death. Depends who speaks them." He accepted that, though it left him uneasy. A gust slammed against the wall, hard enough to rattle the shutters. He rose to check the door, instinct tightening in his gut. The snow was piling high now, nearly covering the threshold. As he shoved the bar into place, a faint flicker of movement caught his eye, a shape in the distance too quick to be a shadow. He grabbed his rifle. Someone's still out there. She stiffened, clutching the child closer. "He won't stop." "You know him?" Her gaze dropped to the floor. "He used to come to the mission when they gave rations. White coat, papers, smile that didn't reach his eyes. Said he was helping. Said I owed him work." The cowboy frowned. "A government man. Worse, a man who likes power more than law." He pushed the door open a crack, snow blasting in. Nothing but darkness and shifting flakes. Still, that unease stayed with him, the kind that warns a man when something's circling. He bolted the door again and turned back to her. "You should sleep, I'll keep watch." "I don't sleep," she said. "Not when he's near." There was no arguing with that either. Hours dragged by. The storm beat against the cabin, relentless. At some point, the cowboy dozed in his chair, rifle across his knees. He woke to the faint sound of humming again, her voice quiet but steady. The child rested in her arms, and for the first time, he saw her smile, small and fragile as firelight. He realized then that she wasn't just cleaning his home, she was cleansing it. Every sweep of her hand, every gesture toward the fire, felt like she was driving out ghosts he hadn't known were haunting him. But peace never lasted long in these parts. A thud on the roof snapped both their heads up, then another, closer. Snow sliding off the shingles, maybe, or footsteps. She rose instantly, holding the child against her chest. He's here." The cowboy stood, cocking the rifle. "Stay behind me." A shadow passed across the frosted window. Then came the knock, 3 times, the same as before, slow, deliberate. He stepped to the door, finger on the trigger. "You get one chance to speak," he called. The voice outside was muffled but calm. "Didn't mean to startle you, friend. I just lost my trail horse in the storm. Thought I saw a light." The cowboy exchanged a glance with her. "That him?" She shook her head slowly. His voice got colder. He unlatched the door halfway. A man in a wide coat stood there, snow crusted in his beard, hat pulled low. His face was unfamiliar, older, maybe 60, with eyes that had seen too much. "You alone?" the cowboy asked. The stranger nodded. "Been riding 3 days from Fort Union, looking for a doctor who's gone missing. Heard he came this way." The woman went still, every muscle locked. The cowboy caught it too. "What kind of doctor?" "Government issue," the man said. "Name of Claymore. Tall, pale, scar on his cheek." The cowboy's stomach turned cold. The name matched the one stamped on an envelope he'd found weeks ago in an abandoned mailbag. Addressed to a Dr. Claymore, U.S., Agency, Apache territory. "He was here," the woman whispered. The stranger's gaze sharpened. "Was?" She nodded once. "He died in the storm. I buried him." The old man studied her face, then looked toward the fire. "Then maybe you've done the territory a kindness." The cowboy lowered his rifle slightly. "You knew him." The stranger sighed. "Long enough to know he earned every ghost chasing him." A silence fell. The storm had quieted, but something darker hung in the air, a sense that this was only the beginning of what they'd both run from. The stranger turned to go. "Keep your door barred," he said. Claymore had friends, the kind that think debt don't die with the man who owed it. When the door shut again, the woman exhaled shakily, as if she'd been holding her breath for years. "He won't be the last," she said. The cowboy nodded, stoking the fire higher. "Then we'll be ready." Outside, the wind shifted, softer now, but in its sigh was the promise of new footsteps approaching through the snow. By dawn, the storm had quieted, leaving the valley buried under a white silence. The air was sharp, clean, almost holy. The cowboy stepped outside with his rifle slung low, scanning the ridgeline. No tracks but his own. Wind had erased the night. Yet something in his gut told him they weren't alone. When he returned, the woman was feeding the fire, her child nestled in the crook of her arm. She looked up once, measuring his expression. "You saw him?" "Not yet," he said, "but the snow hides more than it buries." She nodded as if she'd expected that answer. Then she handed him a piece of bread she'd warmed on the coals. "Eat, you'll need strength." It was the first act of care he'd felt from another human in months. He took the bread without a word, chewing slowly, the taste plain but grounding. After a while, she began to clean again, quietly folding the few blankets. rearranging his tools, sweeping ash from the hearth. Each gesture felt like she was repairing the world, one motion at a time. He found himself watching her more than he should have, drawn not by beauty but by presence, the calm of someone who'd already endured the worst. "How long you been running?" he asked finally. "Since the raids," she said, not looking up. "They burned our tents. Took men to build the fort, women to wash floors. I left before they decided which I was." He let the silence answer for him. Outside, a lone raven cried across the valley. The baby stirred. She rocked it gently, her eyes softening for the first time. "He's all that's left," she whispered. He swallowed. "And the man last night, Claymore. He wanted the child. He wanted to erase what he made," she said flatly. "The baby's his." The words landed like a bullet. He stared at her, then at the sleeping bundle. "You mean—" She nodded. "He took what wasn't offered. Then he sent men to make sure his sin never spoke." The cowboy felt his jaw tighten. He'd seen cruelty in his life, wars, hangings, debts paid in blood. But this struck deeper. He looked at her differently now, not as a runaway, but as someone hunted for surviving. She sensed it too. "You think I should have stayed silent?" "No," he said. "I think you should have shot him." For the first time she almost smiled. "I tried." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney, then hoofbeats. Both turned toward the door. This time it wasn't the measured rhythm of one rider, but the broken gallop of two, maybe three. The cowboy's heart slammed against his ribs. He reached for his rifle, motioning her toward the back wall. "Take the child," he said. "There's a root cellar under the floorboards. Hide there." She hesitated, clutching the baby. "And you?" "I'll keep them busy." Before she could argue, a man's voice rang out from the yard. "Cabin ahead! Smoke's fresh!" The cowboy cursed under his breath. He could hear the jingle of bridles, the soft snort of horses. Through the window he caught a glimpse, 3 riders, rifles slung, faces hard with intent. He knelt by the floorboards and pried one loose. "Go," he ordered. She met his gaze one last time, fierce and unwavering. "Don't die for me, cowboy." "Wasn't planning to," he said. Then she disappeared into the dark, the boards settling softly back into place. The first bullet cracked through the window, shattering glass and scattering sparks from the fire. The cowboy dropped behind the table, returning a shot that whined off a post outside. The gunfire echoed through the frozen trees like thunder. "Inside!" someone shouted. He fired again, reloading fast, his fingers stiff from the cold. The front door burst open under a heavy kick, snow swirling in with 2 figures behind it. He aimed at the first shape, squeezed the trigger. One man fell, clutching his chest. The second dove behind the woodpile, firing blindly. The cabin filled with smoke, gunpowder and firelight. The cowboy crouched low, shifting toward the hearth. His heart pounded, each beat louder than the next. Then a small sound, a baby's cry, muffled but sharp. It came from below the floorboards. The intruder heard it too. The man grinned, teeth yellow in the dim light. "So that's what you're hiding." He rose, rifle aimed downward. The cowboy didn't think. He moved. 1 step, 2. Then he slammed into the man's shoulder, both of them crashing into the table. The gun went off and grazing his arm. Pain flared hot, but he didn't stop. They grappled, boots sliding on the slick floor, until the cowboy drove his knife into the man's side. For a second, everything froze. The man gasped, eyes wide, then slumped forward. Outside, silence. The other rider must have fled or was waiting for daylight. The cowboy staggered back, breathing hard. His arm bled freely, but he ignored it. He pulled the floorboard loose again. The woman looked up, eyes shining in the dim light, the baby pressed to her chest. "It's done," he said, voice rough. "For now." She climbed out slowly, gaze fixed on the lifeless man on the floor. "You shouldn't have done that." He wiped the blood from his hand. "Didn't see another choice." "There's always another choice," she whispered. Then, more softly, "You saved us." He didn't answer. He only watched the snow drift through the broken window, each flake catching in the firelight, like falling ash. Somewhere beyond the ridge, another horse neighed. The sound carried far and clear, a reminder that dawn never meant safety. Morning came slow, pale light creeping over the snow like breath over glass. The storm had passed, but the land looked different, hushed, heavy, waiting. The cowboy stepped outside with the dead man slung across his shoulder, boots sinking deep in the drift. He didn't dig far. The earth was too hard, so he laid the body under a pine, covered it with stones, and spoke no words. The wind would do the rest. When he returned, the woman was standing by the hearth, feeding the child. The air smelled faintly of cedar smoke and boiled grain. She didn't look up when he entered. "You buried him?" He nodded. "Didn't know his name." "Didn't matter," she said. He hung his coat near the fire, wincing as blood seeped through the bandage on his arm. She noticed and crossed the room silently, kneeling beside him. "Let me see." "It's fine." She ignored that, pulling his sleeve back. The wound was shallow but raw. She cleaned it with warm water, wrapped it in a strip torn from her own shawl, and tied it with deft fingers. He watched her hands move, steady, sure, gentle. "You always fix things you didn't break." She met his gaze briefly. "Someone has to." Outside, ravens circled above the pines. Their cries carried far, echoing against the mountains. He tried not to think about what might bring more men here. "You said there'd be others," he said. She nodded. "Claymore's men don't stop. They think the child carries proof, letters, records. He kept them close." "He was a doctor," the cowboy muttered. "What kind of proof?" "The kind that could hang men with uniforms," she said. "He took money for every Apache sent to the mines. Said it was medicine. Government never asked questions." The cowboy's stomach turned. "And you took what he left." "I took what he feared," she corrected. "A life he couldn't erase." For a while, they said nothing. The baby fussed softly, and she quieted him with a whisper. The fire cracked, warm and alive. He found himself thinking about how long it had been since this cabin had felt like something worth protecting. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It had shape, purpose. By midday, the sun broke through the clouds, glittering on the snow like shattered glass. The woman stepped outside to hang blankets on the porch rail, her shawl fluttering in the wind. The cowboy watched from the doorway, the smell of wood smoke and pine filling the air. For a fleeting second, it looked almost like peace. Then he saw the tracks. Fresh ones, 3 sets of boots leading toward the ridge. He followed them with his eyes until they vanished into the trees. "They're circling," he said quietly. She didn't turn. "How long?" "Since dawn, maybe earlier." She folded the last blanket and came inside. "Then we leave tonight." He frowned. "You can't travel with a child in this cold." "I've done worse." He hesitated. "You got somewhere to go?" She looked toward the north, where the ridges broke into pale horizon. "There's an old mission near the river. Abandoned, but the walls still stand. We can make it by tomorrow." "We?" She met his eyes, unblinking. "You saved us. That makes you part of this now." He almost laughed, but it came out hollow. "You don't know what kind of man I am." "I know what kind stays when he could run." The words hit harder than he expected. He glanced at the child, asleep again by the fire. "If we go tonight. I'll pack what we can carry." As the sun slid behind the peaks, he gathered supplies, salt pork, cartridges, a lantern, blankets. The wind had stilled, but the quiet outside carried tension like a held breath. When darkness came, they saddled his horse. She rode behind him, the baby bound against her chest, her arms wrapped tight around his waist. The trail was narrow, snow crunching beneath hooves, moonlight catching on frost. They didn't speak for a long time. The rhythm of the ride was enough. Somewhere behind them, wolves howled, their cries cutting clean through the night. After an hour, she leaned close, her voice low. "You still don't ask my name." "I figured you'd tell me if it mattered." "It doesn't," she said, and then, after a pause, "But you should know it before we die." He turned slightly, surprised by her calm. "Call me Nalin," she said. "It means water." He nodded once. "Fitting. You move like it. Quiet, but strong enough to carve stone." She almost smiled. "And you?" Don't think I remember what my name means anymore." They rode on, the cold biting deeper. Ahead, the valley widened, the river cutting silver through the snow, but behind them, far off yet clear, came the faint sound of hooves again. He tightened his grip on the reins. "They found our trail." Narlin's hand brushed the knife at her belt. "Then we make the river before dawn." He urged the horse faster, snow flying under its hooves. The lantern's flame swung wildly, lighting their faces in brief flashes, hers steady, his set with grim resolve. Somewhere beyond the next ridge waited the mission and whatever future the storm had spared them. But the night was long, and not all ghosts stayed buried beneath the snow. The river came into sight just before dawn, a black ribbon cutting through the white expanse, half frozen, steam rising where the current still fought the cold. The horse was trembling from exhaustion, its breath clouding the air like smoke. The cowboy pulled the reins, slowing them near a fallen tree that bridged the water. "That's the mission on the other side," Narlin said softly. In the grey light, the ruins were barely visible. Stone walls caved in, a bell tower cracked open to the sky. He dismounted, boots crunching on ice. "Doesn't look like much shelter." "Better than open ground," she said, sliding off behind him. She cradled the child close, wrapping him tighter in the blanket. "The walls remember prayers." "Maybe that's enough." They crossed the river one step at a time, hooves slipping on the slick wood, water hissing against the horse's legs. When they reached the far bank, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of smoke. "Someone's been here," he muttered. She nodded, scanning the horizon, or still is. Inside the mission's shell, the air was cold but still. Birds nested in the rafters, and old hymn books lay scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. The cowboy pushed open a door half hanging from its hinges, revealing what might have once been a study. A single chair, a desk, and, miraculously, an iron stove still intact. "Could work," he said. While he gathered wood, Naylin laid the baby on a blanket near the wall. She moved with the same quiet precision as before, but her shoulders were tense. "He won't stop chasing," she said, "not until he finds what Claymore left." "What did he leave?" She hesitated. "Something inside this place." He froze. "You knew this was where you were headed all along." "I had to be sure," she said. "Claymore hid a ledger here, records of every trade, every name, every deal. If the soldiers find it first, they'll burn it. If I find it, I can end it." He set the wood down carefully. "End it how?" "By showing the world what they did." Her words carried a conviction that shook him. She wasn't running. She was finishing something. They searched the ruins together. Dust hung in the beams of morning light, each step stirring echoes. In what had once been the chapel, he found the bell lying in pieces, its mouth half buried in snow. Beneath it, something carved into the floorboards, a faint cross and a mark shaped like a serpent. "Narlin!" he called. She came quickly, crouched beside him, her eyes widened. "He used the serpent mark on his papers." They pried the boards loose. Beneath them, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small book bound in cracked leather. The ledger. She opened it carefully, pages filled with inked names, columns of numbers, and a red seal on every 10th page. Some lines were smudged, others marked with initials, but the meaning was clear. Claymore's work wasn't medicine, it was profit. For every name crossed out, another payment recorded. She stared at the book as if it were breathing. "These are my people." He looked over her shoulder. "Then that's your proof." She closed it, tying the cloth tight. "Proof don't stop bullets." "Maybe not," he said, "but it gives you reason to take one." Her gaze softened, studying him. "Why help me?" He thought for a long moment. "Because I've done things that needed burying. Maybe this makes it even." She smiled faintly. "You think saving me balances the scales?" "No," he said quietly. "But it's a start." They built a small fire in the stove, its warmth creeping slowly through the room. The baby slept between them, his tiny fingers curled like twigs. The sound of the flames and the whispering wind through the cracks filled the silence. "You ever think of leaving?" she asked. "Used to," he said. "Now I just think about what's worth staying for." She watched the fire, her expression unreadable. "Staying gets people killed. So does running." Her eyes met his then, long enough for something unspoken to pass between them, something neither of them had the words to name. Outside, the wind rose again. The horse snorted nervously. The cowboy stood, crossing to the doorway. The tracks they'd left by the river were already gone, swallowed by new snow, but far off, across the plain, a dark line moved against the white. Riders. He turned back. "We've got maybe an hour." She didn't panic. Instead, she stood, wrapping the ledger and slipping it beneath her cloak. "Then we make it count." He nodded once, checking his rifle. "We can block the doors, take the tower for cover." Nalin looked at the sleeping child, then back at him. "If they break through, then you run," he said. "Ledger, child, both. And you?" "I'll slow them down." Her jaw set. "I won't leave you." He almost smiled. "You will if you mean to live." Snow began to fall again, heavy and slow. The mission walls groaned in the wind. Inside, the fire flickered low, its light falling across their faces, two souls bound by circumstance, standing on the edge of something that looked a lot like fate. The first gunshot cracked through the air before sunrise. It echoed across the valley, bouncing off the stone walls of the ruined mission. The cowboy was already awake, crouched near the window, rifle in hand. The snow outside glowed faintly in the dawn light, blue and endless. He could see them now, 4 riders fanning out along the ridge, dark coats moving through the white like wolves on a trail. "They found us," he said. Nalin tightened the child's wrap, then looked up from where she sat by the fire. "Then it's time." Her voice didn't shake. He nodded toward the back wall. "Get below when I say." "They'll try to circle." She moved to the stove, tossing a handful of ash over the fire until it died to embers. "They'll expect us to run." "Good," he said. "Then they won't expect this." He lifted his rifle and took the first shot, aiming for the lead rider. The bullet struck true. One man tumbled from his saddle, his horse bolting. The others scattered, returning fire. Stones splintered from the mission walls, dust raining down. The baby stirred and whimpered. Nalin pressed a hand over his tiny chest, whispering softly, "Shh, little one. The earth's just moving." Another shot tore through the window frame, close enough that the cowboy felt the wind of it brush his cheek. He ducked back, reloading fast. "They'll try to flush us out." "I can draw them," she said suddenly. "Like hell," he snapped. "You move, they'll cut you down before the snow melts." But she was already thinking, eyes flicking toward the tower. "If I can get high enough, I can see them coming. I'll call out their flanks." He wanted to argue, but she was right. Their only chance was to see before being seen. "Go," he said, finally. "But take the ledger. If I fall, you ride north." Nalin didn't answer. She slipped the book into the folds of her blanket, then darted for the staircase at the back of the room. Her footsteps were light, vanishing into the cold stone. The cowboy took position by the door again. He could hear the riders regrouping. 2 were circling wide, 1 approaching straight on. He fired once more, hitting the snow near their lead horse, driving it sideways. They returned fire, bullets cracking the air in tight bursts. From above, Nalin's voice called out, clear, cutting through the gunfire. "Right flank, 2 riders." He shifted, aimed, and shot again. A scream echoed across the plain, then silence. Smoke from the gun barrel mingled with the morning fog. The 3rd rider dismounted, moving toward the door under cover of a fallen beam. The cowboy caught a glimpse of his face, young, sharp-eyed, wearing a marshal's badge dulled with grime. So it was lawmen now, not bandits. Claymore's Reach had friends in every uniform. "Throw down your gun!" the marshal shouted. "You're harboring a fugitive and government property." The cowboy's laugh came low, dark, funny. "Looks like my property's shooting back." The marshal fired again, bullet grazing the doorframe. The smell of powder filled the air. Up in the tower, Nalin ducked as a shot whined past her head. She clutched the child close with one arm, rifle in the other. Her breath came in clouds, every exhale a prayer she didn't know how to finish. She could see more shapes on the horizon now, maybe 2 more riders in the distance, or just ghosts of the wind. Then the marshal's voice again, closer. "You can't save her, cowboy. You'll hang for it." The cowboy gritted his teeth. "Maybe, but not today." He waited until the marshal stepped into the open, then fired. The man spun backward, falling into the snow without a sound. For a long moment, there was only the wind. Then, quiet hoofbeats, moving away. The others were retreating. He stayed at the window until the shapes vanished into the trees. Only then did he lower the rifle. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of what came next. Nalin descended slowly from the tower. The child pressed against her shoulder. Her face was pale but steady. "It's over. For now," he said. "But they'll send more." She glanced at the bodies in the snow, then back at him. "You killed for someone you barely know." He shrugged, weary. "Guess I know enough." She stepped closer, searching his face. "Why?" He thought of all the nights he'd spent alone, of every empty mile behind him. "Because nobody ever did the same for me." Her eyes softened. She reached out, fingers brushing the bandage on his arm. "Then maybe this time, it's not just survival." He held her gaze, the quiet between them thick as smoke. Outside, snow began to fall again, slow, gentle, erasing the blood. The baby whimpered, and Nalin looked down, rocking him softly. "We can't stay," she said. "I know." "Then where?" He stared toward the north, where the mountains rose like a promise. "Somewhere Claymore's name don't reach." She nodded once. "Then we ride at dusk." As she turned away, he watched her silhouette against the pale light. Strong, unbroken, a woman carved from the land itself. He realized then that he wasn't protecting her anymore. They were protecting each other. And somewhere in that fragile understanding, in the ruin of the old mission, something new began. A kind of faith not written in books, but in blood and choice, and the small warmth of hands that refused to let go. They left the ruins at dusk, the snow glowing faintly under a bruised sky. The mission fell behind them, its bell tower a crooked shadow swallowed by distance. The wind had softened, but the air was heavy with the scent of coming weather. Wet pine, iron, and the faint trace of smoke that never quite left the mountains. The cowboy led the horse through a narrow pass, its hooves muffled in the snow. Nalin rode behind him, the child bundled close against her chest. Every few minutes she looked over her shoulder, eyes scanning the horizon. There were no riders in sight, but both of them knew that didn't mean safety. "Have you ever been this far north?" he asked, mostly to break the silence. "Once," she said. "Before the soldiers came, my people hunted deer here. The water was clean then." He nodded, glancing toward the frozen river twisting through the valley below. "Still looks clean enough to me." "It looks," she said softly. "Doesn't mean it is." Her words hung between them, sharper than the cold. By midnight they found a narrow cave cut into the ridge. The cowboy checked the ground for signs of animals, then led the horse inside. Nalin followed, the child stirring but not crying. He built a small fire at the entrance, the glow barely enough to light their faces. The warmth settled into the stone walls, slow and reluctant. Nalin unwrapped the baby, pressing her lips to his forehead. "He's hungry." "I've got jerky," the cowboy offered. She smiled faintly. "He doesn't have teeth yet." He chuckled under his breath. "Right!" After a moment, she reached into her pack and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside was a handful of dried berries and cornmeal. "This will do." She poured a little into a tin cup, added snow, and set it near the fire to melt. The cowboy watched her work, the careful rhythm of her hands, the patience in every motion. "You know what you're doing," he said. "Had to learn," she replied. "There was no one left to teach me." He nodded. "That's how it goes." For a long time they said nothing. The baby drank quietly, the fire crackling low. Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying faint echoes, too distant to name, but enough to make the cowboy reach for his rifle. "Still chasing," he muttered. Nalin didn't flinch. "Then they haven't learned fear yet." He looked at her. "You sound like someone who has—" Her eyes found his in the dim light. "Fear's a thing you live with, not something you beat." He wanted to answer, but couldn't. The truth of it cut too close. When the child slept, she leaned back against the cave wall, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "You fought before," she said quietly. I can see it in how you listen to silence. He shrugged. War makes a man good at waiting. What war? The one they said would make us better men, he said, staring into the fire. Never did. She studied him a moment longer. And what did it make you? He hesitated. Tired. The word settled like a confession. She didn't press further. Instead, she reached over, tearing a strip of cloth from her shawl, and began wiping soot from the edges of the pot. Tired men still get to choose what they do next, she said. He looked at her then, the calm in her eyes, the way the firelight caught the thin scars on her wrists, the quiet strength that had nothing to do with muscle or gunpowder. He realized he'd been wrong earlier. He wasn't protecting her. She was teaching him how to remember what being alive felt like. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and slow. The flakes drifted through the cave mouth, melting as they touched the firelight. You think we'll make it past the ridge? He asked. If the river doesn't flood, she said, and if your arm holds. It'll hold, he said, flexing it. Hurts less when I don't think about it. That's most pain, she murmured. He smiled faintly. You always talk like that. Like what? Like you're writing something only the wind can read. For the first time, she laughed, a quiet, surprised sound that felt like warmth in the frozen dark. Maybe I am. He stared at her a long moment. You ever think about staying somewhere, building something again? She shook her head. The land don't belong to us anymore. Not to my people, not to yours. It just watches. He looked at the sleeping child. Maybe it's waiting for someone new. The fire burned lower. The night settled around them like a thick blanket. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, long and mournful. Nalin leaned her head back against the stone and closed her eyes. Wake me if they come. He nodded, though he knew he wouldn't sleep. He sat by the entrance, rifle across his knees, watching the snow fall through the narrow gap of the cave mouth. The silence was almost peaceful, the kind that makes a man forget how close death rides. But even as he stared into the dark, he could feel it, the tremor of hooves under the earth, faint but steady. The hunt wasn't over. He looked back at Nalin and the child, their faces soft in the glow. Something stirred in his chest, a quiet vow, wordless but solid. If the mountains wanted blood, they'd have to take his first. When dawn broke, the mountains burned gold beneath a cold, colorless sky. The snow had stopped, but mist coiled low across the valley, curling around rocks and pines like breath from the earth itself. The cowboy stirred the embers of their fire until they glowed, warming his hands. Beside him, Nalin woke slowly, brushing frost from her shawl. The baby slept between them, cheeks flushed pink from the cold. He handed her a tin cup of melted snow. We'll move soon. The light gives us cover. She nodded, sipping quietly. The riders will use the low road. We take the ridge. He looked up the slope, steep, narrow, and slick with ice. That's no road. It's not supposed to be, she said. That's why they won't follow. He smiled faintly. You sure you weren't a scout before all this? Her eyes held his. Every Apache woman learns to read the land. It's the only thing that doesn't lie. They packed in silence, each motion deliberate. The cowboy slung his rifle and lifted the child onto the horse. Nalin followed, settling behind the saddle, her hand resting against the baby's chest. When he mounted, their shoulders brushed, a brief touch, accidental but grounding. For a moment, it didn't feel like fugitives riding into the wild. It felt like a family leaving home. They climbed slowly, the path twisting between frozen trees. Every sound seemed magnified. The crunch of hooves, the whisper of fabric, the distant drip of melting ice. The cowboy glanced back often, scanning for movement below. Nothing yet. At the ridge's peak, the world opened wide. Miles of untouched snow, sun striking the peaks like shards of glass. He stopped to let the horse rest. Nalin slid down, pulling her blanket tighter. We'll cross that valley by noon, she said. There's a hunting camp near the falls. If it's still standing, we can eat. He studied her face, the quiet certainty, the exhaustion she carried like a second skin. You talk like you've been leading armies. I talk like someone who's been hunted too long, she answered. He looked out across the valley again. Then maybe it's time you stopped running. She gave a small laugh, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. Men like you can stop. Women like me don't get to. The wind lifted her hair, carrying the faint scent of sage. He wanted to say something, anything, but words felt too heavy in his mouth. So instead, he took her hand and pressed it briefly against his chest. Then let's just keep moving, he said. For a long time, they rode in silence. The land changed around them, snow giving way to patches of dry grass, the river below thawing into glittering veins of water. By midday, clouds began to gather again. The first arrow struck the tree beside them. The cowboy spun in the saddle, rifle raised. Down! Nalin slid off the horse, clutching the baby. Another arrow hissed past, embedding in the snow. Shadows moved in the trees, 2, maybe 3 figures, quick and silent. Bandits, he muttered. Not Claymore's men. Doesn't matter, she said, voice steady. They'll take the horse, then us. He fired once, out the echo rolling through the valley. A figure fell from the ridge, tumbling into the brush. The others scattered. For a few heartbeats, everything was still again. The cowboy listened, waiting. Then footsteps, closer this time. One of them was circling behind. He crouched low. Stay here, he told her. If I don't come back, ride west. You'll come back, she said. He gave her a look that said he wasn't sure, then slipped into the trees. The air was thick with mist. He moved slow, following the faint crunch of boots on snow. Then he saw him, a man crouched behind a fallen log, pistol drawn, aiming toward where Nalin hid. The cowboy didn't think. He lunged, knocking the man sideways. They fought in silence, and snow flying, breath steaming. The bandit swung first, catching his jaw. The cowboy countered, driving his fist into the man's ribs, then disarmed him with a twist that ended in a sharp crack. The pistol dropped. When he turned back toward the ridge, Nalin was standing with her rifle raised. One of the other bandits had crept behind him. Blade drawn, she fired once. The man fell face first into the snow. The cowboy froze, ears ringing. Slowly, he looked back at her. She lowered the rifle, smoke curling from the barrel. You said I should have shot him, she said. Guess I finally listened. He exhaled, nodding once. Good timing. She walked toward him, the child still pressed close. For a moment, their eyes met, not as strangers, but as equals forged by the same fire. He reached out, brushing his thumb over the soot on her cheek. You saved my life. Her lips curved slightly. Then we're even. They stood that way for a breath longer than either meant to, the silence between them full of something fragile and unspoken. Then the baby stirred, breaking the spell. Come on, he said. We've still got daylight. They left the bodies buried in the snow, climbing higher toward the next ridge. The sun dipped low, painting the world in amber light. As they rode, the cowboy looked at her again, her steady gaze on the horizon, the child asleep against her heart, and realized he was no longer thinking about the men chasing them. He was thinking about what might come after. Somewhere behind them, thunder rolled, not from the sky but from hooves. The hunt wasn't done, but for the first time, it felt like they might outrun it. By the time they reached the hunting camp, daylight had begun to fade again. The trees opened into a small clearing where 2 cabins leaned against one another, roofs half collapsed under old snow. Smoke stains darkened the chimneys, but no footprints marked the ground. The place looked untouched for years, a ghost's shelter waiting for the living to step inside. The cowboy dismounted first, scanning the perimeter. Empty, he said. Too empty. Nalin slid down carefully, her body stiff from the ride. Then it's safe for now. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of pine resin and old ash. He set the rifle near the door, while she laid the baby on a cot made from deer hide. The child stirred once, then slept again, breath soft against the silence. The cowboy found a half-barrel of dried wood behind the door and lit a small fire. Orange light crawled up the walls, chasing shadows back into the corners. For the first time in days, warmth reached them without the sound of wind clawing at the windows. You can rest, he said. I'll keep watch. But she shook her head. You're the one bleeding. He glanced at the bandage. The wound had reopened somewhere along the trail, darkening the cloth. "It'll hold." She stepped closer, her voice firm. "Sit." He did, too tired to argue. She knelt before him, unwrapping the bandage and rinsing the wound with melted snow. He hissed between his teeth but didn't move. Her touch was careful, efficient, each motion a language of survival. "You've done this before," he said. "For others," she murmured. "Never for one who fought beside me." Her eyes lifted briefly to his, and something passed there. Recognition, gratitude, a flicker of warmth she tried to hide. She tied the fresh cloth tight and sat back. "Thank you," he said quietly. She looked away. "You'd have done the same." He wasn't sure he would have, not once, but her faith in him made the doubt burn away. As night settled deeper, they ate from what little they had. Jerky, dried beans, snow melted in a tin cup. The sound of the fire filled the gaps where conversation didn't reach. After a long silence, she said, "There's something you should see." From within her cloak, she pulled out the ledger. The leather was damp from snow, but the pages inside were still intact. She spread it open near the fire, careful not to let the flame touch it. "These names," she said, running her finger across the ink, "aren't just Apache. Some are soldiers, some are traders. He kept both sides paid." He frowned. "So Claymore wasn't just running a scheme, he was building one." She nodded. "He sold medicine to the forts and sickness to the tribes. Vaccines marked wrong, dosages halved. They called it progress. He called it balance." The cowboy's jaw clenched. "And the government let him. They funded him." He leaned back, staring at the names, the rows of figures beside each. "If this ever gets out, it won't," she said. "Not unless I live long enough to hand it over." He looked at her, then at the sleeping child. "That ledger's a death warrant for anyone who touches it." "Then it's already written for me," she said calmly. The way she said it, without fear, without drama, made something inside him twist. He closed the book and handed it back. "Then we'll write it different." She studied him. "You think you can change what men like Claymore built?" He shook his head. "No, but I can make sure they don't finish it." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire popped, throwing sparks between them. Nalin reached out, brushing her hand lightly against his wrist. The gesture was small, but it stilled him. "Why are you really helping me?" she asked. He looked at her, tired eyes softening. "Because you remind me of something I thought I lost, someone who didn't stop fighting." She tilted her head. "A woman." He nodded once. "My wife. She died waiting for me to come home from the war. I came back, but not the same man she knew." Nalin's voice lowered. "And now? Now I'm just trying to be the man she thought I was." The silence that followed was gentle, not heavy. She reached for his hand and held it, not like lovers, but like survivors. The firelight caught the scars on both their wrists, lines that told the same story in two different languages. "You already are," she whispered. Outside, the forest sighed. Snow began to fall again, thick and silent. The cowboy stood and checked the door. The fire had dimmed to a steady glow, the warmth wrapping around the three of them like a promise. He turned back to her, watching as she lay beside the child, her eyes drifting closed. The ledger rested near her hand. For the first time in weeks, he felt still. But as he sat down by the fire, the faint sound of a distant horn cut through the night. Faint, deliberate, echoing down the valley. He looked toward the darkness beyond the trees, jaw tightening. The hunters were still coming, and now they knew exactly where to find them. The horn sounded again, closer this time, deep, deliberate, echoing like thunder rolling through the trees. The cowboy's hand froze on the latch. He turned toward Nalin, who was already awake, eyes sharp, clutching the ledger to her chest. The child whimpered, sensing something heavy in the air. "They found us," he said quietly. Nalin rose, pulling her shawl tight. "Then the mountain's done hiding us." He crossed the room, peering through a crack in the boards. The tree line moved, dark shapes shifting against the pale snow. Lanterns flickered in the distance. 4, maybe 5 riders. They're not rushing. "That means they know we've got nowhere to run." She knelt by the fire, stirring the embers to life. Then we don't run. He gave her a look, half admiration, half disbelief. You've got more fight in you than most soldiers I knew. She didn't smile. I'm not fighting for pride. I'm fighting so my son has a name. The cowboy loaded his rifle with calm, practiced hands. Then let's give him a story to carry it. He doused the lantern, plunging the cabin into half dark. The only light came from the slow pulse of the fire. Outside, the horn called once more, 3 notes this time, like a signal. Then silence. Nalin crossed to the cot, laying the baby in a basket lined with fur. She pressed her lips to his forehead, murmuring something soft in her native tongue. The cowboy didn't understand the words, but the sound itself was a prayer, a thread tying life to what might come after. He looked at her. If I tell you to run, she cut him off. You'll waste your breath. The faintest smile crossed his face. Didn't think you'd listen anyway. The first shot tore through the window, splintering the wall. He ducked low, returning fire through the gap. The echo cracked across the valley. Another bullet shattered the doorframe. Nalin dragged a heavy table across the room, propping it against the door. They'll circle, she said. 2 at the front, the rest from the ridge. You've done this before, he muttered. Her eyes flashed. Once. Another gunshot rang out, closer. Snow fell from the roof with the impact. The cowboy fired again, saw a shadow drop behind a log. He felt the old rhythm returning, the one he'd sworn he'd buried after the war. Every shot, every breath, mechanical and sure. Then came the voice outside. Throw out the ledger, and we'll let you walk. He glanced at Nalin. They want proof, not blood. She shook her head. They'll take both. He tightened his grip on the rifle. Then they'll have to dig for it. Another round of shots split the air. One hit the stove, sending sparks flying. The baby cried, thin and terrified. Nalin crouched low, shielding him with her body. The cowboy crawled to the window, took aim, and dropped another rider. The man's lantern fell, spilling flame across the snow. The blaze caught the edge of a dry pine, lighting the night like a warning. They'll burn us out, he said. Nalin's eyes darted toward the back wall. There's a route passage. Old hunters used it. It leads down to the creek. He shook his head. You go, I'll buy you time. Her voice turned sharp. No. We leave together. Another bullet shattered the shelf above them, showering glass and splinters. The cowboy winced as one cut his cheek. Go! He barked. But she was already moving, grabbing the child, the ledger, and his arm in one motion. If you stay, you die for nothing. Reluctantly, he followed her to the rear wall. Behind a hanging pelt, she found the trap door, a square cut of rotting boards. She shoved it open with her boot, revealing a narrow crawl space lined with ice and dirt. He handed her the rifle. You first. She hesitated only a second. Don't look back, she said, and slipped into the dark. He dropped in after her, pulling the door shut overhead. The world shrank to a tunnel of cold earth, lit only by the faint flicker of firelight leaking through the cracks. Behind them, the cabin groaned as flames licked the walls. The sound of boots and shouting grew louder. They crawled until the tunnel opened near the frozen creek. The night air hit them like knives. Smoke curled from the cabin above, black against the snow. They'll see the tracks, he said. Then we make them chase ghosts. She set the baby down beside the creek, wrapped in blankets, and turned back toward the cabin. The cowboy grabbed her arm. What are you doing? If they think we died in the fire, they'll stop looking. He stared at her, realization dawning. You mean to burn it all? She nodded once. Ledger, cabin, everything. Let the proof die with the guilty. He wanted to argue, but she was right. Claymore's men didn't want truth. They wanted silence. Together they watched as the flames consumed the cabin, smoke rising into the pale sky. The horn blew once more, distant now, uncertain. The cowboy turned to her. Then where do we go? She looked toward the north, where the mountains met the horizon. Someplace the fire can't reach. He met her eyes. The orange light of the burning cabin reflected in both. You sure it exists? No, she said. But that's where hope lives. He nodded slowly, picked up the sleeping child and handed her the rifle. "Then let's start walking." Behind them, the cabin collapsed in on itself with a roar. Ahead, the snow stretched endless and untouched. The horn did not sound again. They walked north through the burned night. By dawn, the valley behind them was nothing but smoke and ash, a grey scar stretching between the peaks. The cowboy carried the child in his arms. Nalin walked beside him, the rifle slung across her shoulder, the ledger gone, ashes scattered by her own hand. The fire had erased their past, but not the men who made it burn. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was snow crunching under boots, the faint rattle of the wind through dead branches. The cold bit deep, numbing thought and pain alike. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, it painted the world in pale gold. The cowboy stopped, setting the child down to rest. His arm throbbed where the bandage bled through again. "You're hurt worse than you said," Nalin murmured. He shrugged. "Pain's quieter when you keep moving." She tore a strip from her shawl, pressed it against his arm, and tied it tight. "You can't carry him forever." "I'll manage." Her eyes softened. "You always say that like it's a promise to someone else." He glanced up. "Maybe it is." They walked on, crossing a frozen stream where the ice cracked beneath their steps. Ahead, pine trees grew thick again, offering shelter from the wind. By noon, they found a hollow between two boulders just wide enough to rest. Nalin set down the rifle, gathered twigs, and lit a small fire. Smoke curled into the cold air, faint but steady. The cowboy watched her work, her face calm despite the exhaustion written in every line. "You never told me his name," he said finally, nodding toward the child. She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Taza. It means fresh start." He smiled faintly. "Fitting." "He was born the night the soldiers came," she said. "My husband tried to fight. He didn't last long." He looked down, saying nothing. "I ran," she continued. "Taza was crying. I covered his mouth so they wouldn't hear. When it was over, I couldn't stop shaking. I thought I'd killed him." Her voice broke then, just a little. The cowboy reached over and placed his hand over hers. "You saved him," he said simply. "That's all that matters." She nodded, blinking hard. "You talk like a man who knows what it's like to lose everything." "I do," he said, "but not like you." They sat in silence. The child slept between them, the firelight painting his tiny face. For the first time, the cowboy realized how small the boy's hand was, how fragile the weight of something worth protecting could feel. When he looked at Nalin again, she was staring at the horizon, the same direction they'd been walking for days. "There's a pass beyond those ridges," she said. "It leads to land no one claims yet. My people said the spirits rest there." He nodded slowly. "Then that's where we'll go." Her gaze flicked toward him. "You don't have to follow me." "Yeah," he said, smiling without humor. "But I will." Afternoon bled into dusk. They climbed higher, each step a battle against the cold. The wind grew stronger, sharp as broken glass. Snow drifted thick, turning the path ahead into a blur. When they reached the ridge, they stopped to rest again. From there, the world fell away, miles of frozen forest stretching to a distant horizon tinged pink with sunset. Nalin turned to him. "When this is over, what will you do?" He thought for a long moment. "Maybe fix fences somewhere. Build something small. Live quiet." She smiled faintly. "A man like you doesn't live quiet. Maybe I've had enough noise." She looked at him then, really looked. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the smell of smoke and pine. "If you wanted, you could stay. Where I go." He met her eyes. "You sure about that?" Her voice was steady. "No, but maybe that's the point." He didn't answer, but something in his chest eased. They stood together until the sun vanished behind the peaks. Then came the sound, distant, faint, but unmistakable. Horses. The cowboy froze, listening. "They're not done yet." Nalin's hand went to her rifle. "Claymore's men." He nodded grimly. "Or what's left of them." The wind shifted, carrying voices, shouts, the crack of branches. The fire flickered, nearly dying. She turned to him, eyes fierce again. "We can't run this time." He shook his head. "No, we finish it." They packed fast, no words wasted. Nalin strapped the child to her back, his small head resting against her shoulder. The cowboy checked his rifle, reloaded, and glanced toward the ridge below. Through the veil of snow, he saw them. 3 riders, dark against the white, moving fast. He turned to Nalin. "When I fire, circle wide through the trees. They'll follow the sound. I won't leave you. You said that before," he said with a half-smile. "But this time, I need you to break your word." She met his eyes, saw what he wasn't saying. Then she nodded. "I'll come back." "I know." He kissed the child's forehead once, then raised his rifle. "Go!" As she disappeared into the trees, the riders crested the ridge, their coats snapping in the wind. The cowboy took a deep breath, steady and slow, the moment stretched thin as glass. Then he fired. The shot echoed down the valley like thunder calling the storm home. The snow whipped across the ridge as the cowboy crouched behind a boulder, rifle poised. Below, 3 riders moved fast, their dark shapes cutting shadows across the white landscape. The wind tore at his coat, carrying the sharp scent of pine, gunpowder, and cold earth. He could hear the distant hum of Nalin's path through the trees, the circling he'd instructed, and knew she was moving to strike from behind. The lead rider raised his arm, signaling the others. The cowboy's finger tightened on the trigger. Each second stretched like a drawn wire, every heartbeat a drum echoing in his chest. He exhaled slowly and fired. The lead horse collapsed in the snow, tossing its rider to the ground. The others hesitated, confusion flickering across their movements. Below, Nalin's rifle cracked. One man went down with a sharp cry. Another whirled, spinning his horse toward her direction. The cowboy moved fast, keeping low, firing at the one closest to him. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, snow exploding around the impact. The rider fell forward into a drift. The wind tore at his hat, teeth chattering, but he pressed on. His eyes caught movement, a rider still advancing, slower now, wary, Claymore himself. Claymore's face emerged, pale and cruel beneath his wide-brimmed hat, eyes fixed on the ridge. "You'll pay for this," he shouted, raising his pistol. The cowboy didn't hesitate. He aimed carefully, squeezing the trigger. Claymore's gun went off simultaneously. A bullet tore across the rock beside him, shaving a splinter of stone. The cowboy dove to the side, rolling through snow and ice, rifle clattering. Claymore raised the weapon again. From the tree line, Nalin fired. The shot struck Claymore in the arm, forcing him to drop the pistol. The cowboy scrambled forward, seizing the opportunity. He tackled Claymore into the snow, rolling until the older man was pinned. The cold bit deep, and Claymore's teeth ground with rage. "You won't stop me," Claymore hissed. "I already have," the cowboy said. His hands gripped Claymore's collar, eyes locked on the man's twisted features. "And it ends here." Claymore lashed out, fists swinging. The cowboy countered, blocking, twisting, striking, every movement calculated, fueled by anger and the need to protect what mattered. Blood ran cold along his knuckles, snow turning red under the struggle. But the cowboy was stronger, faster, driven by something that Claymore had never understood. The weight of what it meant to protect life, not exploit it. A final strike, a hard push and a fall into the snow, sent Claymore sliding, face first. The cowboy seized the pistol he'd dropped, keeping it trained on the man. Claymore's breathing came in sharp, ragged gasps. The wind carried it away, mixing with the heavy, quieting snow. "Don't," Claymore rasped. "You don't know what you—" "Shut up," the cowboy said. "You know exactly what you did." Nalin appeared then, carrying the child. Her eyes were fierce, but her hand rested lightly on his shoulder. "He's done," she said softly. The cowboy lowered the weapon slightly, letting the cold snow settle around them. Claymore's eyes met his once more, disbelief and fury frozen in the frozen landscape. He wouldn't rise again. The wind carried the sound of the retreating riders, the rest of Claymore's men fleeing into the distance, leaving only snow and silence behind. The ridge was theirs. The cowboy exhaled slowly, looking down at Nalin and the child, the ledger they had destroyed, the mission burned behind them, the pursuers gone. What remained was life, fragile and fierce. Nalin knelt beside the child, brushing snow from his hair. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it," he corrected. She looked up, eyes meeting his. A pause passed, full of the unspoken weight of what they had endured together. The snow around them settled, the world quieting as if granting a fragile peace. The cowboy helped her to her feet. "We move before the sun sets," he said. "They could still regroup." She nodded, slipping the child onto his back. "I trust you," she said. "And I you," he replied. For a moment, they stood at the edge of the ridge, looking out over the valley. The wind carried the faint scent of pine, smoke, and snow, reminders of what had been lost and what had been saved. The ridge behind them bore the ruins of pursuit, the battlefield of survival. But ahead lay the unknown, mountains stretching endless, valleys untamed, snow turning under their boots like a blank page. The cowboy lifted his eyes to Nalin. "No promises," he said quietly, "but I won't let you or him fall." She gave a small, tired smile. "That's all I need." Together, they began the descent, boots crunching softly on the snow, the child secure between them, the weight of survival heavy but lighter for shared courage. Behind, the ridge faded. Ahead, only the journey remained, and for the first time since it all began, the world felt vast, dangerous, and undeniably alive. The sun had long vanished behind the peaks, leaving only a silver glow over the snow-covered valley. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying a faint chill that made the cowboy tighten his coat. He walked beside Nalin, the child nestled securely against her chest. For the first time in weeks, neither of them ran. The horizon was open, the trail theirs to follow. They reached a small plateau, sheltered from the wind by jagged rocks. Nalin lowered the child, letting him sit against a blanket she spread on the snow. His small hands pressed into the fabric as if testing the safety of the world around him. The cowboy studied them both, the weight of everything they had survived pressing against him, and yet somehow lighter than before. "I never thought I'd see the sun again without fear," he said quietly. Nalin glanced up at him, her dark eyes steady. "The sun doesn't care who fears it," she replied. "It rises anyway." He nodded, feeling the truth in her words. It had been a long road, days and nights chased by men who had no law, no conscience. Yet here they were, alive, stronger, and with the choice to continue living on their terms. The child stirred, yawning, and she smiled softly. "Taza," she said, "you'll remember this day, little one." The cowboy crouched beside them, letting the warmth of their presence wash over him. The snow sparkled faintly under the moonlight, untouched, as if honoring their journey. Every scar he carried, every wound, both physical and in memory, felt purposeful now, shaping him into someone capable of protection, loyalty, and care. He looked toward Nalin. "You could have run alone," he said. She shook her head. "I wanted someone who would stay." "And you found me," he said, voice low, a quiet acknowledgement of trust and companionship. They shared no words beyond that. Silence carried more meaning than any conversation could. The night stretched around them, filled with the steady rhythm of the creek nearby and the whispering wind through the pine needles. For the first time, the cowboy allowed himself to believe that survival didn't just mean living. It meant building something new, a space where choices mattered. They would move on from this plateau, farther north, to land no one claimed, snow unbroken and pure. Perhaps someday they would find a place to call home, a refuge for Taza, where the echoes of the past couldn't reach them. Every step forward would carry the weight of memory, but also the hope that every act of courage, every moment of care, had been worth it. The ridge behind them remained silent, their enemies gone, their threats diminished by fire, snow, and the relentless will to survive. And though the mountains remained indifferent to their presence, they had carved out a small corner of the world where life and love could endure. As the child dozed against her shoulder, Nalin tightened the blanket, and the cowboy wrapped an arm around them both. Together, they watched the horizon, the faint glow of dawn promising another day, another chance. For the first time in a long while, the world felt alive and waiting, not with danger, but with possibility. In that quiet, fragile peace, the cowboy realized something profound. The journey was never just about survival. It was about the bonds forged through trust, the courage to act when others wouldn't, and the quiet acts of care that changed lives without ever being noticed. He had lost much in the world, but he had found something greater: companionship, purpose, and the chance to protect what mattered most. And as the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine and snow, he knew they were ready for whatever came next. If you've been captivated by this tale of courage, trust and survival, don't stop here. Subscribe now to follow every twist and turn in the lives of the cowboy, Nalin, and little Taza as they navigate a world where danger lurks behind every ridge and hope shines through the harshest storms. Each week, we bring you cinematic, real-feeling stories that pull you into the heart of human resilience, featuring characters whose bravery and choices will stay with you long after the video ends. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode of thrilling survival, redemption, and unexpected bonds forged in adversity. Join our community of viewers who appreciate the power of storytelling that blends realism, suspense, and emotion. Stories where every decision matters and every moment could change fate. Step into the world where courage meets consequence and watch the journey unfold with every click